This is an Alexandrian Media original podcast.
On today's episode of Gameplay, music historian Andrew Shaw and I dive deep into the music that makes the Elder Scrolls video games truly tick. Andrew's research focuses on the role of song in the construction of identities. He has presented his research at the University of Pittsburgh, as well as Temple University's Graduate Forum and Francois Couperin's Symposium. Andrew is also an accomplished opera singer, having been an active soloist and choral singer in the Philadelphia area for the past 15 years, singing with ensembles such as the Philadelphia Symphonic Choir, Philharmonia, Opera Philadelphia, Concert Operetta Theater, and Singing City. Andrew is a dear friend of mine, and I am very excited to have him on our show. We've known this episode has been a long time coming, and I'm very happy to finally be able to share it with you. Andrew and I have both been huge fans of the Elder Scrolls video games for quite some time, and in a few moments you'll get to hear both of our experiences with the games and how we both got involved in them. The game has been such an influence on Andrew's life that he's personally done extensive research on the music, and that's why I asked him to be a guest for this episode. This is the Composer Chronicles, a podcast that recounts the stories of composers past and present through the music they write. I'm Stephen Trigar, and this is episode number 41, Gameplay Disc 2, Music in the Elder Scrolls with Andrew Shaw. Well, I am joined today by my dear friend, Andrew Shaw. How are you today on this lovely 5th day of snow in Philadelphia?
Oh, doing well, thank you. It is, the snow is coming down. It's not coming down heavily, thankfully, but it is, the flakes are definitely larger, which probably means it's not going to stick as much, and we'll hope for that.
Yeah, it's not sticking on the roads here yet. It's sticking on the cars, but not the roads. So
Yeah.
well, I wonder if they actually started salting ahead of time, unlike the beginning of this week where the roads were so bad, at
Oh,
least in
yes.
my area. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about the Elder Scrolls games, particularly Elder Scrolls 3, 4, and 5. I'm sure we're going to talk about 4 and 5
Yes.
a little bit more often, but 3 is a little bit important in terms of the musical trajectory between the 3 games that we're talking about. So I know this game has been a big part of both of our lives, but tell me about how you discovered this game and what really drew you to it.
So, as with a number of players for the more recent generation of Elder Scrolls games, I came about. I came to the Elder Scrolls through Skyrim. Skyrim was probably the biggest release in recent memory for Bethesda, the company, and it was fascinating. I mean, I didn't even play it until I would say maybe a year or two after it had been released, but I knew it existed. They had a hugely successful marketing campaign with the 11/11/11 release date and everything going out and all the videos, and they even had some live action trailers that were really interesting for someone who was so interested in fantasy and like pseudo medievalist kinds of narratives, which is really cool. But I vividly remember, I think it had to have been either the freshman year of college. A friend of mine had a copy, an Xbox 360 copy, on their in their dorm room, and we were just sort of hanging out after a day of rehearsals or a day of class, and they were like, "Oh, you want to create a character?" And so begins the avalanche that was my relationship with the Elder Scrolls. I have gone through, I think, 3 physical copies, just because those discs wear down, unfortunately, quickly the way I play them. And we now have a downloaded one onto the hard drive of my current system, and from there, from Skyrim, I went back, as most people did. As sort of, they were like, "Oh wow, this amazing series. Let's see where it came from." So I first went back to Oblivion, played that for a while, and I played a little bit of Morrowind, not a ton. It was mostly just sort of to get a feel of the game, just because the games themselves and their engines and how they play have changed and evolved so drastically over the past now nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
Between the releases of these 3 games, between the release of Morrowind and today. I mean,
Yeah.
even how they adapt it for the re-releases and the HD releases for the more recent games it's fascinating how it develops. But yeah, that's where I started with the Elder Scrolls. With first, I did it in reverse order: first Skyrim, then Oblivion, then Morrowind.
Yeah, I actually haven't gotten to Morrowind yet. I did a similar thing where, actually, for me, I didn't know about it until much later after its release. I was working at my parents' bakery, and when we were just sitting around and chatting, and uh, one of my coworkers said, "Oh, I started playing this game. It's a massive game, and I." And then another one was like, "Oh, I played that so long ago." I mean, long ago in terms of how video games work. Um, but yeah, and so I became interested, and for some reason another friend of mine was also playing it, and I went over his house one time. He was playing it, and I'm like, "Oh, this is the game that they were talking about." And so I bought myself an Xbox copy. I played it on the Xbox because my brother had just gotten one, um, and then it got broken, so I bought
Uh,
myself a PC version because I had
mhm.
no other gaming system to play it on, and then for Oblivion, I actually only started playing it 2 weeks ago.
Oh,
Uh, However, um, I have watched you play it.
yes.
You and your now wife are have played it before, and I've watched you both play it. And that's actually how I was introduced to the fact that Elder Scrolls was more than just Skyrim.
Yes.
I had no idea that it was anything else other than Skyrim prior to that, despite knowing like, oh, Elder Scrolls 5. I thought it was like, oh, maybe it's just some kind of like,
Maybe there was a 1 through 4, you know?
yeah, who knows? But yeah. Um, but we're here to talk about the music.
Yes.
And so I just know that from my own experience, the music of Skyrim is probably some of the most iconic video game music. I mean, people can hear the music from Skyrim and they're like, that was from Skyrim, even if you really don't really know that to begin with. But it's pretty big.
It
Would
it
you
has.
agree?
Oh, definitely. It's back. I mean, I know we're still living in the in COVID times, but before the pandemic and when there were more often concerts, and especially concerts of video game music, you'd be hard pressed to find a concert that didn't have at least one Elder Scrolls track on it, whether it be from Skyrim, the more popularized one, or one of the previous versions or themes or something like that, especially in years past. But yeah, definitely, it's definitely a very it captures the sort of fantasy ideals. And I think this is an idea that I want to circle back to eventually, but it really has a great way of capturing that essence of the fantasy narrative in a way, about
Mhm.
how you interact with that as a player, and really sort of at once sets the tone and it creates an atmosphere, but also sort of pushes you along as a character, as a person playing a character in a game,
Mhm.
and really that can create a very potent experience, whether you're playing the game and you're just in your basement or in your living room, or if you're in a concert hall, or you're in a venue where you're hearing the music. It has a very powerful sense of purpose, of theme. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's some, like I said, it's some great music. Especially that opening
Yes, it is.
theme, um, which is vastly different from the opening theme of Mo- uh, Morrowind and Oblivion. Skyrim's opening theme um, seems to be less cinematic, if that makes sense. More, I don't know how to explain it. I don't know if you can can explain it better than I can.
um I see where you're saying this, actually. It's a bit more, maybe this is tipping my cards to my biases, but operatic in a way. It's very especially, this is it uses actual voices. It's not
Hmm.
a sampled or a synthesized sound,
Yeah.
and it uses voices. There are words, there's text, even if it's in a dragon language that nobody upon release could translate. It has that sense of sort of inherited culture, if that makes any sense. There's like a sense
Yeah.
of mythopoeia, sort of like that you're observing something that exists within the world, and that changes how you interact with it. You have a different um, palette to work with. It's interesting though, because that the Elder Scrolls theme, as it's been dubbed by its composer, exists in all three title tracks. You have the Call to Magic, later retitled Nerevar Rising, from Morrowind, which is sort of the Urtext, the original version of this theme. It's where it all began. And then you have the Reign of the Septums, where it takes a bit more of a swashbuckling, sort of like upbeat, up-tempo version. Da, da, da,
Yeah.
ya, pa, pa. I don't know if you'll get a copyright struck for that. I apologize.
Nope.
Uh, but and then you have, actually, that theme appears as the B theme in the Dragonborn
Hmm.
track, in the climactic sort of unison uh, choral setting, which is just, I find that especially nostalgic, having now played all three games, like, because it ties it all together. I mean, it you do have that adaptation of the theme with the Dovahkiin text, but then it just sort of brings it all back together once you get to that B theme. And if you listen long enough, it just is, it's a moment where, even just talking about it now, I'm getting hairs are sticking up on the back of my neck. It was a very potent use of that theme.
Oh, it was. Oh, it's so good. I remember when you actually first told me about that, because you've done research on this before. You you told me about this, and I'm like, I had no idea. Especially because I hadn't really played the game before, so I didn't really pay attention to that a lot. But I had heard the music, and I didn't really pick up on the fact that there was this uh, theme that repeated in the major kind of opening credits of each of these three games, and it's it's incredible what people are able to do with music and when creating some kind of story. But yeah, when you said swashbuckling about the Oblivion music, I was like, that is exactly the word I was thinking.
Yeah,
um,
it's actually. I mean, I don't know if you're going to ask anything later about this, but it's interesting to consider sort of the musical influences that occurred around the publishing of these different games, because
mhm.
you have, I mean, right as Morrowind's coming out, you have the Lord of the Rings video movies coming out, or
Right.
2001, 2002, 2003 ish, and then right around the time of Oblivion, you get the Pirates of the Caribbean films are really sort of taking that center stage in around 2005, 2006. So it's interesting. I mean, they're they are works unto themselves. They're not entirely trying to piggyback or hold on to the coattails of these larger universes. But it's interesting how those themes, how those styles sort of play into the thematic development of the games themselves.
Yeah. I when I was playing this week, I would start out the game, uh, and then I would let it sit for a few seconds, while I would get up and go do something else. And every time I would do that, Brian, my fiance, would say to me, "Ah, doesn't this sound like Pirates of the Caribbean to you?" Especially on a hushed kind of like, we're not really listening to it, but if you like, if it's in the back of your head, it's kind of like giving you that vibe.
Definitely, especially, I mean, to get even more musical about it, I would say like the rhythmic adaptation specifically. When you think of like the Black Pearl theme from
Hmm.
Pirates of the Caribbean, it
Exactly.
has the same sort of string writing, the same kind of rhythmic drive that you would hear in the Oblivion Reign of the Septums track. But yeah, I think beyond how it relates to the media around it, they're just very convincing and very well crafted sounds or
Yeah.
soundtracks for the games that they're trying to present.
Right.
This makes it very playable.
Yeah. So we've been talking about the music that happens before we even start playing the game.
Yes.
Um, but I just wanted to ask you, in your experience, what has the music brought to you when playing the game? What kind of feelings has it brought, or what kind of aesthetic has the music within the game brought to the overall experience of your playing?
I think okay. So as with you, my the primary sample that I might be able to pull from in this is Skyrim, because
Hmm.
I have played that probably the longest, and the most organically. But I started playing that long before I even started thinking about it critically or academically or
Right.
even musically. I was just playing it, and I could sort of recall how I was thinking about it.
Right.
And there really is a sense of wonder, especially where there's a synchronism of the visual awe that you experience when you climb to a top of a mountain, or you're looking
Hmm.
out at a vast wilderness, or you're fighting a dragon, and the swell of the music in a certain way, or especially there's one of my favorite tracks, Secunda, which is one of the name for one of the moons in universe.
Mm.
That only really it tends to happen when you're adventuring outside. Ten, Generally when you're farther north, so in like more frigid climates, and
Okay.
when it's a clearer night, and it has this piano, this really beautiful piano line.
Hmm.
Dun, 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 dun.
Oh yes,
It's
yes,
very,
yes.
it's almost Tchaikovsky-esque with like the Sugar Plum Fairy-esque,
Yeah.
but it it creates this sort of suspended sense of time,
Hmm.
like you're almost watching the snowflakes drift down,
Right.
and watching the aurora sort of sweep through the sky. There is
Right.
if anything, I think my now looking back on it, the music, whether it's the sort of the driving battle music or the more atmospheric tracks like Secunda, it really gives you as a player the ability to author that experience. It gives you that
Right.
ability to, however you've whatever associations you've built with those kinds of sounds, through whatever kind of media you've taken in, whether it be fantasy or classical music, as we just shared with that Tchaikovsky reference,
Right.
but also just movies. There are a lot of sort of calls back to Howard Shore's Lord of the Rings soundtrack and John
Mhm.
Williams with his vast soundtrack oeuvre. It has this sense of, it gives you a lot of tools to then sort of paint your own picture. So like if you're going to really find that meaning, if you're going to
Mhm.
look out into that snowy night in the north of Skyrim, it gives you all of the colors to paint that beautiful picture. And that's
Yeah.
honestly I've really enjoyed as far as interacting with the games and playing it and just sort of falling into those moments, because there are certain moments where you know it's going to happen. You know that
Yeah.
as soon as, and actually that's a way of it for a way it can communicate to you. You know that
Yeah.
when you hear a certain more upbeat sort of maybe negative mode or minor mode sound, it's like, oh, you're probably going to have an enemy coming up and attacking you, so you should be ready. You should get ready to defend or whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, but there are also moments where you'll be just sort of traveling from point A to point B, unless you fast travel, which I am morally against, but that's a different story. Um, but if
Ye-
you'll just stumble upon these moments where you'll see, as I said, that aurora, that snow, or you'll just sort of fall into these vistas.
Yeah.
And the music just adds that much more of an experience to it. It really gives you, it frames it really well.
It does. And it's actually quite ingenious as well that within Skyrim, at least, there are moments of silence
Hmm.
where there's no music at all. You kind of have gotten used to the fact that there's music playing all the time. Like as you said, it kind of gives you a hint as to whether there's an enemy around or a dragon, because usually a lot of that stuff you can hear with a little cymbal rolling, and then it kind of goes into some darker music. But there are moments where it's just completely silent and you're wondering, where am I? And you get so used to listening to that music to help you determine where you are and what you're doing, that when you get to a moment of silence and you're like, where the heck am I? What am I doing? I think that's, and then it forces you to think about the game a little bit more. And then music comes back in and it kind of uh, confirms where you are. Um, but it's so interesting to play that way. And you've, whether you know that it happened, whether you know that it's happening or not, I think it's fascinating.
I think one of the most telling aspects of the design, musically and just in general of the game, is on the special edition release of the soundtrack. Specifically, there is a
Mm,
46-minute track of just the ambient sounds that occur throughout the game, just sort of stitched together, and I think that tips the hand too of the design choice, because yes, you
mhm.
have this music, you have this um, so much of this well crafted fantasy medium genre of
Mhm.
composition that really helps you highlight those moments of, I'm attacking a dragon or I'm looking over a wonderful vista. But then when it pulls back and you
Mhm.
only have the sound design, you stepping onto the snow, you have the blow
Yes.
of the wind through the cavern that you've just entered into. It really it highlights that you're in a moment playing a game, or
Right.
you're in the moment. It's
Yeah,
no
exactly.
longer just, because if it were all music all the time, it's almost like an opera in a way. Though it would be consistently just, that would be the only part of the narrative. It
Right.
would be, but in almost bisecting it and creating a musical level of narrative and then just an audio part of the narrative as well, that both play off of each other and can almost sort of hand off, sometimes more deftly than others. I've definitely had a few times playing the game where tracks will sort of be confused and be like, "Oh,
Yeah.
well, you just killed the dragon. I guess I have to go back now before the actual before the theme actually hits its climax," and then it just goes to a very awkward sort of. Ooh. Um, but yeah, it is a really dexterous move on the part of the designers and crafters of the game that they allow for silence because it gives you more of that feeling of being in the moment, and it really sort of it highlights the rhetoric of it all. It highlights the
Yeah.
choice and the development
Right.
of those key moments, and especially very story related moments. A lot of there are a handful of tracks that are only ever triggered in specific story beats, which
Right.
create very clear narrative relationship, whereas the other ones are ambiguous enough and thematic enough, but not necessarily so wrought as to be very clear that this is what you're doing, if
Yeah.
that makes any sense. That 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 they can happen multiple times in a playthrough, and you don't think it's necessarily something ridiculously special. Whereas, specifically, when you enter Sovngarde at the end of Skyrim, and you hear the a cappella adaptation of the Dovahkiin text,
Hmm.
uh, that to me is a very powerful moment because you heard it right as you booted the game up the first time you ever got the game. You hear it, it becomes a very significant marker for you as a player, and now that you're facing this final threat and you hear that same theme, that same text coming in and sort of beckoning you into this land of heroes, this sort of
Hmm.
heroic afterlife. Spoiler alerts, by the way, to anybody who's listening to this. um, it really does, it creates a bookending moment for you as a listener and as a player, and brings this very specific sensibility to the
Hmm.
moment. Whereas, um, I don't want to say generic. Well, I'm going to say it. Generic fighting music A, B, C
Yeah.
can happen 3 or 4 times a night when you're playing through it, and you
Yeah.
don't do too much more of it than, oh, I'm fighting something. Oh, it feels really cool that I'm acting so heroic, and I have this huge swell as I'm taking my great sword, or I'm releasing a spell, or something like that. It creates a very. I mean, I'm going to keep on saying this. It's just very well crafted.
Yeah. Yeah. And not only in the moment, but kind of like also when you're out of the moments as well. I'm more particularly thinking of when you're in a battle and then all of a sudden you know that the battle is finally over because the music changes.
Yes.
It doesn't stay there until something you until you go into a new place or enter a new city or whatever. It kind of guides you in a way of the game itself saying, "Oh, this moment is over. You can relax." Or
Yeah, psychologically, it's a very effective tool because
yeah,
imagine if the entire game you were just in that fever pitch of, I need to fight something.
yeah,
Something's going to come and get me. It's a very different experience than I can take a deep breath. Oh, look, I'm on the streets of Whiterun and there are kids chasing after each other. And
hmm,
it's like there is. I mean, it really emphasizes the themes of the game, which are that, like, yes, there's this big climactic fight occurring, whether it's between the Stormcloaks and the Empire, or between you as the Dovahkiin and Alduin, the World Eater,
hmm,
uh, or even in Oblivion, when you as the hero of Kvatch, you're going out and you're trying to um, pretty much bring the Septim dynasty back to power with Martin and having received the Amulet of Kings and all of that. There's so much music that
hmm,
if it were only one atmosphere, one sense of fight, it would get really tiring to play after a while. But like
yeah,
realizing that there are I mean, it creates a world. It allows you to recognize, like, especially when you enter it. I'm thinking of when you enter the tavern and you hear the more diegetic music of like people playing
Right.
playing lutes or guitars or playing some drums or flutes, or like sometimes they have songs in Skyrim specifically that are
Yeah.
written for the bards in these places to sing. So it
Mhm.
really gives you that sense of there is a world um, that this great conflict is occurring in, and some of these people might not even be aware that there's a dragon attacking and causing things, or that the Mythic Dawn is trying to bring in Molag. I think no, it's not Molag Bal. Mehrunes Dagon. Uh,
Mhm.
so many Daedric princes, so little time, but yes, it creates, it gives it dimension. It gives the music gives the world dimension.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching this video. Listen to the full episode on your favorite podcast platform, and if you want to watch the full, unedited video of this episode, become a member on my Patreon for only $5 a month. Patreon members also get access to ad-free versions of the podcast, so head on over there for some great bonus content while supporting the Composer Chronicles. You can find the links to the podcast and the Patreon in the description below, and I can't wait to see you there.